I live in Branson, Missouri, and not far from my house sits an abandoned theme park called Celebration City. It has been deserted for more than a decade, closing its gates back in 2008. The park had a theme centered around American life throughout the 20th century. It used to open in the afternoon and stay open into the evening, with each day ending with a laser show and fireworks. The park had plenty of rides, shows, and attractions, and it usually operated from May until about the middle of September. I went there several times as a kid with my family, so when the park shut down, it honestly felt pretty sad for all of us. Most of the roller coasters were taken down before the park closed for good, but even now, many of the buildings are still standing. A lot of people do not realize it, but it has quietly become a pretty interesting place for exploring. My friend, who I will call Calvin, was completely on board with the idea of going to check it out. I asked him because he is a family friend, and our families had visited the park together when we were younger. We drove over and parked in the Steak and Shake parking lot across the street, since the park's parking area had obviously been closed off for many years. It was around 7 in the evening, and the sun was beginning to set. We did not want to go during full daylight because we did not want to get caught or run into anyone else. We brought a couple of powerful flashlights for when it got dark, though at first we could still see pretty well. When there were no cars around, we jogged across the street so we would not draw attention to ourselves while trespassing. After crossing, we cut through the grass and into the trees that surrounded the park property. It was surprisingly easy to slip inside. Honestly, it barely even felt like we were sneaking in at all. I am not encouraging anyone to trespass, but seeing the old buildings and attractions that I remembered from childhood still standing there in a silent and empty setting was incredibly eerie. It felt like a part of my childhood had died. One thing seemed certain, though. We were the only people in the entire place. The only sounds were crickets. We could not even hear the traffic from the road outside. As we walked around, we noticed that a lot of things had been left behind. It was obvious people had come through the park since it closed, because there were writings and bits of graffiti on the walls. But many props were still in place, or sitting behind glass inside some of the buildings. A few of the windows were broken, which showed that other people had forced their way inside and explored as well. As it grew darker, we decided to climb through one of those broken windows into a building. Once we got inside, we realized it was the diner that used to be called the Last Chance Diner. It was completely dark inside and honestly pretty creepy. The front entrance was shut, locked, and blocked off. There were wooden planks and random pieces of debris scattered all across the dining area. The best way I could describe it was that it looked like a storage space. It seemed like things from outside had been moved into the building. Calvin walked off to look around the other side of the diner. I shouted over to him that I was going to check out the bathroom, and then headed that way. The smell inside the bathroom was different from the rest of the building. I could not really explain it. There were 3 stalls in there, and as soon as I stepped inside, I heard a sound coming from one of them. It sounded like something small had been dropped onto the floor. I said hello while shining my flashlight around the pitch-dark room. All 3 stall doors were closed, but something had definitely made a noise inside one of them. I kept the bathroom door propped open with my foot and then crouched down, pointing my flashlight under one of the stall doors. I saw a pair of shoes and legs. I gasped and jumped back before quickly checking under the other 2 stalls. I saw the same thing there too. There were 3 sets of legs and shoes visible under the stall doors. One of them suddenly started moving, like the person was getting down on their knees to look under the stall door. I did not wait long enough to see their face. I was already running out of the bathroom, shouting for Calvin that we needed to leave. I climbed back out through the broken window, and he followed me, not asking any questions until we were already outside and moving away from the building. I told him what I saw in the bathroom, about the 3 people sitting in the stalls. He joked that maybe they were just using the bathroom, but the way he said it made it clear he did not really believe me. I explained that one of them had started moving like they were about to look under the stall at me. As I tried to describe the strange scene better, his expression changed, and he began to look more unsettled. We clearly were not alone in that place. If those people were just friendly explorers like us, who happened to be using the bathroom, I feel like they would have said something when I walked in, or at least when I called out. By the time we left the park and made it back to the car, it was completely dark outside. Neither of us has gone back there since. I still do not have any real explanation for what I saw that night. It was strange, unsettling, and it instantly changed the mood of what had started as a fun adventure. I am a 30-year-old woman who lives by herself in a mid to lower income neighborhood. Crime does happen around here from time to time, though it is not what most people would call a ghetto. Even so, there are nights when living alone makes me feel a little uneasy. I do not really know many of the people who live nearby. The only neighbors I feel comfortable with are the ones living right next door to me, and they are both friendly people. The houses across the street are a different situation. I have barely spoken to anyone there. Knowing the people around you makes living alone feel safer, and sometimes I wish I knew more of them. I have always been the kind of person who scares easily. Because of that, some of my biggest fears about living alone came true one night while I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. It was late on a work night, sometime after 11. While the house was quiet, I heard the faint sound of leaves crunching along the side of the house. I could not tell if it was a person or an animal. There are plenty of stray cats and raccoons that wander around the neighborhood after dark. The next night, something else happened. I woke up suddenly when I heard a single cracking or tapping sound outside my window. At first, I assumed it must have been the window frame making noise. It was October, and the weather was still warm enough that I liked to keep the windows open for fresh air. Without really thinking about it, I called out, "Who is there?" After that, everything went silent. I got out of bed and lifted the blinds to look outside, but there was no one there. After 2 nights in a row of hearing strange sounds, I started to convince myself that I was probably just overreacting to normal house noises. I tried to relax and fall asleep again, but later that same night, I woke up once more. This time the sound was different. It was like scratching or scraping coming from somewhere in the backyard. I could hear it through the window. I got out of bed again and walked into the small living area near the back door. As I moved closer, the noise became clearer. It sounded like a clicking or scraping right outside the sliding glass door. I turned on the light in the room, and the sound stopped immediately. I walked toward the sliding door, which was covered by a curtain. My heart was pounding because I was afraid of what I might see on the other side. Finally, I grabbed the curtain and pulled it open quickly, like ripping off a bandage. There was no one there. I turned on the backyard light and slid the door open slightly to look outside. I felt a moment of relief when I saw nothing out there, not even a raccoon or some other animal. For a minute, I just stood there listening to the crickets. Then I heard something moving in the yard. A rustling sound came from the bushes. I stared at them. The bushes are thick enough that it is almost impossible to see through them, which would make them the perfect place for someone to hide. If that noise was not a raccoon or a possum, I honestly did not want to find out what it was. I went back inside and made sure every door and window in the house was locked. After that, I returned to my bedroom and even locked the bedroom door behind me. About 10 minutes later, just as I was starting to calm down in bed, there was a knock at my front door. That was when I really started to panic. I stayed in bed and ignored it. Nobody should be knocking on my door that late at night. I decided that if it happened again, I would call the police. Thankfully, it never happened again that night. At some point, I managed to fall asleep. The next day, I went straight to Best Buy with my brother. I told him everything that had happened, and he helped me pick out a doorbell camera along with a set of security cameras for the house. Later, we installed the doorbell camera at the front entrance and placed the other cameras in the backyard in spots where they would not be too obvious. My brother also stayed the night with me so I would feel safer. He slept in the guest bedroom. That night, we were both in our beds trying to get some rest when my phone suddenly buzzed with a notification. Motion had been detected on my property. I opened the Ring app and looked at the camera feed. The moment I saw the video, I screamed. The black and white footage showed someone standing at the back door, trying to pick the lock. My brother woke up when he heard me yell. I showed him the video, and he jumped out of bed immediately. Without even putting on shoes or socks, he ran straight out the back door, ready to confront whoever was there. But my scream must have scared the person off, because when we watched the footage again, we could see him running away. My brother stood outside in the yard and shouted as loudly as he could, telling the person to never come back. Whoever had been trying to break in definitely heard him. Unfortunately, we could not see the man's face in the video. He had his hood pulled down over his head and was dressed entirely in dark clothing. In every frame of the recording, his face stayed hidden. He was also wearing gloves, which meant he did not leave any fingerprints behind. We called the police even though we knew there was not much they could really do about it. Still, it felt better to have them come by and make a report in case anything happened again. After that night, nothing like it ever happened again. I hate to sound full of myself, but I know that I am considered an attractive woman. What really frightens me is the thought that the person outside my house might have known who I was. A young woman living alone would seem like an easy target. Sometimes I wonder if the person could have been someone who lives on my street, maybe even one of the neighbors. I guess that is something I will probably never know. When my parents got divorced, my mom ended up with 2 of the 5 houses that my dad owned. My dad runs a very successful real estate company, so growing up we always had several homes in different places. I am 23 now, so I pretty much stay wherever I want, depending on what is most convenient. Lately, though, I spend most of my time at one of my mom's houses because I am closer with her. During this particular week, my mom had gone to our beach house for a while, leaving me alone at the main house. That situation was not unusual for me. I am used to having the place to myself fairly often. The house itself has a somewhat interesting layout. Upstairs there is a kitchen, a living room, and 2 bedrooms. The first floor below, it is set up almost the exact same way, with its own kitchen, living room, and bedrooms. Then there is also a basement underneath everything. My bedroom is upstairs. When I am home, I mainly stay on that floor, using the upstairs kitchen and living room. My mom usually sticks to the downstairs when she is home, so we each have our own space. It works out really well. The house also has 3 separate entrances. There is a front door, a back door, and a side door. The side door leads to the area where the garbage cans are kept. That is the door I usually use when I take the trash outside. Anyway, the strange situation really began when I started noticing that some of my clothes were missing. Whenever this happened, I would call my mom and ask if she had moved anything from my laundry baskets. Most of the time she would say no, which made sense because we keep our clothes separate since we live on different floors of the house. Still, even during those weeks when I was completely alone at home, I noticed that several of my favorite shirts had disappeared. My room is honestly pretty messy most of the time, so at first I assumed I had simply misplaced them somewhere. But after digging through everything in my room multiple times, I still could not find certain pieces of clothing. It made absolutely no sense. Eventually, I even checked my car and looked through the downstairs rooms, including my mom's bedroom, just in case something had gotten moved there somehow. Nothing. After a while, I convinced myself that maybe one of my friends had borrowed a shirt and forgotten to tell me. Or maybe they would just randomly turn up later when I cleaned my room better. I stopped worrying about it. When I am home alone, I usually sleep with my bedroom door slightly open. I do it so that I can hear if anything strange happens in the house, like if someone tried to break in. One night, I was lying in bed, watching a movie on my laptop, when my bedroom door suddenly closed. It did not slam, but it also did not shut gently either. I had both windows open and my ceiling fan running, so my first thought was that it was just a draft. That sometimes happens in the house. But a few seconds later, I heard a sound from the hallway outside my room. My reaction was probably not what most people would do when they are alone in their house. Instead of hiding, I got up and quickly walked over to the door and opened it. The hallway was dark, so I turned on the light and looked around. Then I walked toward the living room area upstairs, expecting to maybe see something strange. No one was there. I still did not feel completely satisfied, though. So I went downstairs to check the first floor, where my mom usually stays. I looked through the living room, the kitchen, and her bedroom. That was when I noticed that the basement door was slightly open. The light switch for the basement is located right at the top of the stairs. It is one of those pull strings that you tug to turn the light on. I pulled the string and started walking down the stairs into the basement. The basement is rarely used. There is a couch down there, a television, a few workout machines, and a small separate room with a punching bag. Other than that, there are 4 doors that lead into storage closets. There is also a very small door that you have to crouch down to get through. It leads into a tiny crawlspace style storage area. Neither my mom nor I ever really go down there. As I stood there looking around, something in my peripheral vision caught my attention. The little crawlspace door moved slightly. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. I slowly stepped closer to it, trying to figure out if I had actually seen movement, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Then everything inside me froze. From the darkness inside that crawlspace, an arm suddenly reached out and gently pulled the small door shut. At that moment, I felt like my heart had completely stopped. I quietly backed away, trying not to make any noise. Then I quickly, but silently, went back up the stairs. All I wanted to do was get as far away from that basement as possible. The first thing I did once I reached upstairs was call 911 and report that there was someone inside my house. I was extremely grateful that I had not made any noise when I left the basement, because whoever was down there probably had no idea that I had seen him. The police arrived shortly after. They came with their lights on, but without their sirens. 4 officers entered the house and went down to the basement with me. They stood outside the crawlspace door and ordered whoever was inside to come out. After a moment, the door slowly opened. A bald man who looked to be in his 50s crawled out with his hands raised. His face looked strange, almost squished, with a nose that seemed too small for the rest of it. What made my stomach turn even more was the fact that he was wearing one of my shirts. Inside the crawlspace, the officers found several piles of belongings that belonged to both my mom and me, mostly clothing. The entire closet smelled strongly like urine, which made everyone wonder how long the man had actually been hiding down there. There was no obvious damage anywhere in the house, except for the urine stains. But because he had taken several of our belongings, he ended up being charged with 3rd-degree burglary. Somehow that was the only charge. My mom and I definitely did not want any of the clothes back that the man had worn. Looking back, I blame myself for what happened. I most likely left the side door unlocked one night after taking out the trash. That was a lesson I will never forget. Always lock your doors. The thought that someone could secretly be inside your home at any time, simply because a door was left unlocked, is something people should take very seriously. I have worked as a nurse in several hospitals and care facilities over the years. Before the hospital where I work now, I spent some time at a geriatric hospital located about 30 minutes from my home. I already had plenty of experience caring for elderly patients, so the job itself was nothing unfamiliar to me. At the time of this story, I had only been working there for a couple of weeks. Later you will understand why that was the case. The events happened during what would eventually become my second-to-last shift at that hospital, although I had no idea of that when the night began. I was assigned the graveyard shift, and I was running on almost no sleep. That night, I was responsible for the Alzheimer's ward. The patients in that section seemed to really enjoy having me around. Being a young woman in my 20s, among residents who spent most of their days lost inside fading memories, seemed to bring them a little comfort. Many of them appeared to see me as someone who connected them to the present moment. When someone with Alzheimer's is left alone, their thoughts can drift far away into other times and places. But when someone is interacting with them, even briefly, it helps anchor them to the current moment. I had several patients to care for that night, but one in particular was more restless than the others. Her name was Lena. It was my first time looking after her, and every time I entered the room, she would talk about the voices she claimed to hear. She also kept mentioning a man dressed entirely in black, standing in the corner of her room. The other patient who shared the room had already asked the staff before my shift to keep the curtain drawn between the beds, because Lena often spoke to her about these things, and it made her uncomfortable. Despite that, Lena was very sweet. Whenever she saw me, she would smile warmly. She did not talk much outside of those strange comments, and she was extremely forgetful, which was expected in that ward. I started my shift around 9 in the evening, and by 11, most of the patients had gone to sleep. Lena was not one of them. Each time she pressed the call button, and I walked into the room, she seemed frightened. She would whisper about the voices again, and point toward the corner where she said the man dressed in black was watching her. I will admit that hearing this repeatedly started to make me uneasy. I believed that inside her mind, these things were very real to her. Patients with Alzheimer's often experience confusion and hallucinations, and I felt sympathy for her, because if she truly believed she was seeing those things, it must have been terrifying. Still, my job was to comfort her and try to help her relax enough to sleep. I considered turning on the television to distract her, but I did not want to disturb the other patient in the room, who was already sleeping behind the curtain. Instead, I sat beside Lena and held her hands. I spoke softly and told her to take slow breaths and try to relax. I reassured her that she was safe and reminded her that I was right down the hallway if she needed anything. That seemed to help. After a little while, she calmed down, and when I checked on her later, she was finally asleep. Once the entire ward settles down for the night, the shift begins to feel incredibly slow. Time almost feels like it starts moving backwards. An hour or two passed. I was in the linen room restocking supplies on my cart. The room was small and completely silent. I had the door closed while I worked. That was why the sound I heard caught my attention. It was faint but clear enough to make me turn around. I looked across the room but saw nothing. Thinking I might have imagined it, I went back to organizing the linens. Then I suddenly felt something on my shoulder. The sensation was unmistakable. It felt like a large hand resting firmly there. I looked down at my shoulder immediately and jumped back with a scream. There was nothing there. No one was in the room with me. Yet I was absolutely certain I had felt something touch me. My heart was racing as I stepped into the hallway and looked around. There were no other nurses nearby, and the corridor was completely quiet. I had no real explanation for what had just happened, so after a moment, I forced myself to go back into the linen room and finish what I was doing. I continued filling my cart until it was fully stocked. Once I was done, I turned toward the door. The moment I looked up, my entire body froze. Standing outside the door, staring through the small glass window, was a man dressed in black. He was smiling. The sight shocked me so badly that my legs gave out and I collapsed onto the floor. I began screaming at the top of my lungs. As I watched through the glass, the man slowly moved out of view. My screams echoed through the ward. Within seconds, the door swung open, and one of the other nurses rushed inside. She helped me up from the floor while I struggled to breathe. I immediately asked her if she had seen the man dressed in black standing outside the door. She looked confused and said she had not seen anyone. According to her, there was nobody else in that hallway. We quickly checked every room in the ward, but there was no sign of anyone wearing black or anyone unfamiliar in the area. The noise I made had woken several patients, including Lena. When I entered her room again, she immediately began talking about the voices. This time, she also mentioned hearing screams. She did not know that the screams had come from me. Trying to steady my voice, I asked her something. I asked if the man she kept seeing was dressed in black, and if he was smiling. She stared at me for a moment. Then I noticed something change in her expression. Her eyebrows lowered and her face suddenly looked more focused than I had seen all night. She quietly asked me one question. "How did you know?" Even though my heart was already racing, I felt it skip as soon as she said that. Almost immediately, Lena started screaming. She kept shouting that he was coming and begging to be taken out of the room. Other nurses rushed in and tried to calm her down. After that incident, the supervisor moved me to another ward for the rest of the night, so I would not have to go back into that room. Eventually, I ended up going home early because I was still completely shaken by what had happened. The next day, I sent a message to the head nurse. I told her that my upcoming shift would be my final one. I explained that the experience had scared me badly and that I did not feel comfortable returning to that building. She replied kindly and said she understood. I have never been diagnosed with any condition that causes hallucinations, and nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I know that extreme exhaustion can affect the mind, and I was definitely sleep-deprived that night. Still, what I experienced felt far beyond simple fatigue. The feeling of a hand on my shoulder, the image of the smiling man outside the door, and the fact that it matched the description a patient had repeated all night. All of it together created something I still cannot explain. It remains one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my life. And honestly, I hope it is the only time I ever encounter something like that. 3 years ago, I ended up with bacterial meningitis. I live in South Florida, and as far as I know, there was no outbreak happening at the time. Because of that, I have no idea how I caught it or where it came from. The symptoms started hitting me pretty hard. I had terrible headaches, confusion, constant sleepiness, nausea, and I completely lost my appetite. But when the hallucinations began, that was the moment I realized something was seriously wrong. One afternoon I was lying in bed feeling extremely sick while my husband was at work when I heard a child's voice from downstairs call out, "Mom, Mom." The problem was that we do not have any children. I forced myself out of bed and slowly walked to the top of the stairs, trying to look down while calling my husband's name. There was no response, of course, since he was still at work. Standing up made the pounding in my head much worse, so I went back to bed. Not long after that, I heard another voice from downstairs. This time it simply said, "Hello, hello." At that point, I grabbed my phone and called my husband. I was panicking and telling him through the phone that I could hear a child's voice somewhere inside the house and that I thought I might be hallucinating. He could hear how scared I was, so he left work early to come home and take me to the hospital. While I waited for him to arrive, I changed out of my pajamas. While doing that, I suddenly had to rush to the bathroom because I felt like I was about to throw up. While I was in the middle of vomiting, I heard another voice just outside the bathroom door. I could not make out what it said, and I could not tell if it sounded like the same voice from earlier. At that point, I honestly felt like I was losing my mind. I was not officially diagnosed until I got to the hospital, where the doctors told me that untreated bacterial meningitis can be extremely serious and sometimes even fatal. One of the doctors explained that the hallucinations I experienced were somewhat unusual, but still possible with my condition. Not long after arriving, I was given antibiotics through a needle. The doctor also told me that I was lucky I came in as quickly as I did, because waiting longer could have caused permanent damage or even death. My husband stayed in the hospital room with me for several hours. The staff explained that because of how severe my symptoms were, I would need to stay there for several days, possibly up to a week. Around 10 o'clock that night, my husband left to go home since he had to work the next day. Before leaving, the nurse told me to call her if I needed anything. Even though I still felt absolutely miserable, I fell asleep fairly quickly. At some point, I started having a dream where my ex-husband was standing next to my hospital bed, leaning over me and talking. He was saying awful things about my current husband. He gently patted my head and said he was glad I was okay, and that he came as soon as he saw my husband leave. Then he started going on about how much he hated my husband and how he wanted to kill him. While speaking, he kept rubbing my forehead, and eventually he walked out of the room. I sometimes have disturbing dreams about my ex-husband because our marriage was extremely toxic and abusive, which is why it ended. I would rather not go into details about that. Eventually, I woke up feeling groggy and disoriented. I looked around the room and noticed that a chair had been pulled right up next to my hospital bed. No one was sitting in it, but I knew it had not been there when my husband left earlier. Since it was still the middle of the night, I eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning I woke up when the nurse came into the room. I mentioned the strange and very vivid dream I had about my ex-husband. She laughed at first and said that it was not a dream. According to her, my cousin had come to visit me the night before. I immediately told her that I do not have any cousins who live anywhere near this state. Her expression quickly changed, and she looked more serious. She then explained that someone had come in late the previous night and told the staff he was my cousin named David. David happens to be the name of my ex-husband. After I explained the situation more clearly, the nurse brought a doctor into the room. The doctor told me that the antibiotics could have caused delirium, which can make it difficult for someone to tell the difference between sleeping and being awake. According to him, that could explain why I believed I was dreaming while hearing David speak. I called my husband and told him everything that had happened. Naturally, he was furious and very concerned, so he came back to the hospital again that evening after work. Earlier that same day, I sent David a text asking what he thought he was doing by visiting me, and how he even knew I was in the hospital. My message showed that it was delivered, but he ignored it at first. I sent another message telling him that I heard the threats he made about my husband, and that I was considering contacting the police. A few minutes later, he finally responded. He wrote that he never threatened my husband at all. According to him, he was only there because he heard that I was sick and wanted to make sure I was okay. He claimed that I must have misunderstood what I heard while half asleep. I replied by telling him to stay out of my life, or I would involve the police again. After that, he never answered. I never told my husband about the threats I thought I heard that night, because I truly do not know whether they were real. Considering the antibiotics and the hallucinations I was already experiencing earlier, it is entirely possible that my mind twisted what actually happened. But at the same time, I cannot say for certain that it did. About a week later, I was finally discharged from the hospital. I once matched with a girl on Tinder named Francesca, and we actually stayed friends long after that first meeting. Right away, she seemed interesting. She had a full sleeve of tattoos covering her left arm, red streaks in her hair, and her profile mentioned that she loved working out. One of the photos on her profile showed her standing on the rooftop of a tall building with an amazing view behind her. I asked her where that picture was taken. She told me it was the roof of an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town that was supposedly incredible to explore at night. According to her, it was really easy to sneak inside. There was usually a police officer driving around the massive parking lot to discourage people from trespassing. but she claimed it was simple to avoid being seen. She suggested that we go there together for our first date, if you could even call it a date. I thought it sounded awesome. She seemed cool, and meeting someone that way felt way more interesting than the usual plan of grabbing drinks somewhere. I picked her up from her house, which was only about 10 minutes away, and then we drove about 20 minutes to reach the hospital. During that drive, we talked a lot and got comfortable with each other pretty quickly. When we arrived, she told me to park on a quiet dead-end street, hidden behind a wall of tall bushes. From there, it was about a 5-minute walk to the building itself. We hopped over a small barrier separating the street from the hospital property, and then ran across the huge empty parking lot toward a patch of grass near the entrance she normally used. She guided us to a shattered basement window that served as her usual entry point. The place already gave off a creepy feeling, but I had signed up for the adventure. I was glad I had worn the old jeans she recommended, because it was obvious they were going to get snagged on something. The only lights we had were the flashlights on our phones. We had not brought any powerful gear or anything like that. Francesca moved through the building like she knew every corner of it. She led us through the basement and up to a stairway that went to the higher floors. I will admit that standing inside a massive abandoned hospital at night with only one other person was already pretty unsettling. I just did not realize how much worse things were about to get. Once we reached the first floor, Francesca kept talking in a normal voice that felt way too loud in the silence. I kept thinking someone might hear us. Suddenly, down the hallway we were standing in, there was a sound like a door opening or closing. The noise echoed straight toward us. She heard it too, and immediately stopped talking. I whispered and asked if it was normal for other people to be there. She said sometimes it happened, but not very often. We both shut off our flashlights and stood still. A loud bang suddenly echoed through the corridor, much closer than before. We both panicked and rushed through the darkness. I followed behind her, even though I could barely see anything. We made it back to the stairway and ran up the steps with our lights turned back on. After climbing a couple floors higher, we finally slowed down and started talking again. Francesca said the police never came inside the building, so it was probably just other people exploring. The strange part was that we had not seen any flashlights in that hallway. Nobody normal would be walking around a place like that in complete darkness. Then we heard another sound echoing from the stairwell we had just used. Someone was coming up the stairs. We panicked again. She said she knew another way and started running. We hurried through a confusing maze of hallways and rooms. At that point, I was genuinely terrified. It really felt like someone was chasing us, and I was not sure whether I would prefer it to be the police or some random stranger. After several minutes of running, she led us out onto a small outdoor section of the building. It was not the main rooftop, but more like the roof of a lower level. We stopped there to catch our breath. The idea that someone might still be following us completely ruined the mood. Even Francesca seemed uneasy now, and I had been relying on her as the person who knew this place best. After a few minutes, we relaxed a little. Then we climbed through a broken window that led into the ceiling area above a large room. This part was nerve-wracking because she wanted to walk across long, narrow wooden planks with about a 10-foot drop beneath us. Falling from that height would definitely hurt, but I did not want to look weak. I carefully followed her across one long board until we reached the top of a large pillar where one plank ended and another one began. We sat down on the pillar and hung our legs over the edge while talking quietly and looking down into the darkness below. The room felt eerie and empty. At least that is what I thought until we heard movement underneath us. It sounded like someone walking on the floor below. Since whoever was down there probably already knew we were around, we turned on our flashlights and pointed them downward. Standing directly below us at the base of the pillar was a man who looked to be in his 40s. He was wearing a black Carhartt beanie, a black jacket, and black sweatpants. He stared up at us with a strange smile on his face. In a deep, unsettling voice, he said, "Come on down," while motioning with his hand for us to climb down. I asked him if he was a police officer. He ignored my question completely, as if I had not even spoken. Still smiling, he repeated the same thing. "Come on down." Francesca and I stood up immediately and started moving back across the narrow board. My fear of falling was even worse now, because I had no idea what that guy might do if he reached us. Halfway across the plank, we saw him hurry out of the room below through a doorway. He was clearly going to try to intercept us. We rushed across the rest of the board and started running through the building again. We headed down a stairwell on the opposite side of the hospital. While we were racing down the steps, we suddenly heard a door several floors above slam open, followed by heavy footsteps pounding down the stairs. Somehow he had managed to follow us. We ran as fast as we could. It honestly felt like we were running for our lives. Eventually, we made it back to the first floor and sprinted to the side of the building where we had entered earlier. We went down to the basement and climbed back out through the broken window. Hitting through that window was terrifying, because I climbed out second. For a moment I thought someone might grab my legs from inside. Luckily by then it seemed like we had lost him. We ran across the huge parking lot straight to my car. The moment we got inside, we locked the doors and sat there breathing hard. The whole experience had been a nightmare. But strangely enough, going through something like that together created an instant connection between us. We drove away from the hospital and ended up stopping at a Wendy's so we could eat and calm down. We sat in the car talking for about an hour before I finally drove her home. Francesca and I kept in touch after that night. We actually dated for a few months, but eventually we realized we were better off as friends. One thing we both agreed on, though: neither of us ever went back to that hospital again. My wife Cheryl and I have been together for 10 years, and we finally got married 2 years ago. Just under a month ago, we bought our first house together. Unfortunately, the start of our life there has been far from peaceful. We moved to a small inland town in Georgia called Waycross. I will leave it at that to avoid giving away anything else that could cause problems. Our house sits on a quiet street, and the property is fairly large. Behind the backyard, there is a stretch of woods that is not huge, but still thick enough to block the view of anything deeper inside. One of the main reasons we loved the place was because of the yard. We want to adopt a dog and eventually raise kids here, so having plenty of space for them to run around was important to us. Cheryl and I both work similar schedules. I usually get home from work around 5 in the evening, and Cheryl normally arrives about an hour later. The first 2 nights in the house were completely normal. It was the weekend, so we spent most of the time unpacking boxes and organizing the rooms. The strange stuff did not begin until Monday night. We had already gotten into bed and turned off the lights. It had probably only been about 20 minutes when suddenly we heard loud music coming from outside in the backyard. Our nearest neighbors are far enough away that we would never mistake music from their homes as coming from our yard. This was definitely somewhere behind our house. The music itself sounded incredibly old. It had a scratchy, static-filled quality, like something playing from an antique record. The windows were closed, but Cheryl and I immediately looked at each other with confused expressions. I leaned over and opened the window beside the bed, and the sound became much clearer. Some vintage song was blasting outside. It sounded like it came from the 1940s or something. Later, I searched the lyrics online and learned that the song was called "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf" by Henry Hall. Song itself is meant to be cheerful, but when you hear it echoing through the darkness behind your house late at night, it suddenly feels very unsettling. At that moment, though, we had no idea what it was. We were still learning the layout of the house, but I figured there had to be a switch somewhere that controlled the backyard lights. I ran downstairs to the back door and flipped the switches on the wall beside it. One of them turned on the lights outside. When the yard lit up, I did not see anyone standing there. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The music sounded much louder once I was in the yard. After standing there for a few seconds, I realized the sound was not actually coming from the yard itself. It was coming from somewhere inside the woods. The song eventually finished playing while I was standing there staring into the trees. When it ended, everything went completely quiet again. My first thought was that someone nearby must have been playing some kind of prank on the new people who just moved in. I went back upstairs and told Cheryl that it was probably just some teenagers trying to scare us. Even while I said it out loud, I realized how ridiculous it sounded. Why would anyone bother doing something like that? The following night, it happened again. Just a few minutes after we turned the lights off in our bedroom, music started blasting from outside once more. This time, it was even louder than the night before. The song playing was Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Cheryl and I looked at each other again, but this time the confusion was replaced with real concern. We had hoped the previous night was just a one-time situation, but clearly it was not. I walked over to the window and looked outside. This time, I noticed something sitting out on the grass in the yard. It was not a person, but there was definitely an object there. I told Cheryl I was going to go check it out. She immediately said we should call the police instead. I told her we would, but I wanted to see what it was first. In my head, I had convinced myself that whoever was doing this needed to understand they could not intimidate us in our own home. I walked outside toward the object in the grass. As I got closer, I realized it was smaller than I originally thought. The creepy song was clearly coming from it. It was an old radio. I turned it off and held it up while looking back toward the bedroom window where Cheryl was watching from inside. I shouted that someone must have left it there to scare us with the music. Her reaction caught me completely off guard. She suddenly started screaming my name over and over, telling me to run back inside the house. She kept yelling, "Run." I shouted back, asking why. Her voice came back shaking as she screamed that there were people standing behind me. The moment she said that, my heart felt like it stopped. I slowly turned around and looked toward the woods. 3 figures were standing there among the trees. They were spaced several feet apart from each other, and they were clearly facing in my direction. They were not running toward me. They were just standing there watching. I yelled something like, "Oh my God," and immediately ran back toward the house. I slammed the door behind me as soon as I got inside. Cheryl was already upstairs crying hysterically. I grabbed my phone and called the police right away. Thankfully, they arrived pretty quickly. During the wait, we were both terrified that someone might knock on the door or start banging on the windows. When the officers showed up, we explained everything as clearly as we could. I showed them the radio that had been left in our yard. I asked if they could take it with them and check it for fingerprints. I made sure to tell them I had only touched the handle on the top. They agreed to take the radio with them. The officers also walked over toward the edge of the woods and shined their flashlights around for a few minutes. I think it was mostly done to scare off whoever might still be hiding out there. Once the police left, though, the sense of safety disappeared again. Cheryl and I felt extremely vulnerable sitting there in our house. Thankfully, the people in the woods never came back that night. This all happened only a few weeks ago, though. If those people ever return again, I will definitely try to record it on video. When I first bought the house I live in now, my neighbors came over almost immediately to introduce themselves. The people on both sides of me were incredibly friendly, which made the move feel a lot more welcoming. My place sits right on a canal. I specifically wanted a waterfront property because I own a boat, so being able to dock it right behind my house was perfect. Of course, living on a canal comes with one drawback. Privacy in the backyard is almost non-existent because the houses across the water can see straight into your yard. From the very beginning, even when I first came to tour the property, I noticed the house directly across the canal. I did not like the look of it, It seemed neglected and poorly maintained, and honestly, it was a bit of an eyesore when I sat outside in my yard. For the first couple of weeks after moving in, I got into the habit of glancing at that house every night before closing my blinds. Every single time I looked, the place was completely dark. Not a single light on anywhere. I started wondering if maybe it was a vacation home or some second property that the owner rarely used. But then one evening something changed. Earlier that day, my brother had helped me launch my boat into the water and bring it around to the dock behind my house. Later that night, just before I shut the blinds in my bedroom, I looked across the canal again. This time, there was a light on inside the house. Through what appeared to be the living room near the back door, I could see a man standing there and looking outside, so someone actually lived there after all. From what I could tell at that distance, the man was wearing sweatpants and a long-sleeve shirt. He had a full head of grayish hair. Judging purely from how he looked, he seemed like he might have been around 50 years old. It also looked like he might have been staring directly toward my windows. Although, to be fair, he could have just been looking out into the yard while thinking about something. I shut my blinds and went about the rest of my evening. The next day after work I came home, dropped my stuff on the kitchen table, and went outside into the backyard to spread grass seed in the lawn. While I was out there, I glanced across the canal again. The man was standing at the back door again. This time there was no doubt he was watching me. It was obvious. Our eyes met and we held eye contact for a few seconds before I finally looked away. I felt awkward. Waiting would have felt strange. So I tried to act like I had not noticed him at all, even though he kept standing there and staring. It almost felt like I was doing something wrong just by being in my own backyard. One afternoon I invited a few friends over so we could take the boat out. When we left the dock, and later when we came back, I did not see the man standing there. I had only noticed him twice at that point, but it already made me uneasy. Anytime I stepped outside, I found myself automatically glancing toward his back door. A few nights later, I checked out the window from my bedroom again. He was there again. I started wondering how long he would just stand there like that. The whole situation felt incredibly strange. I turned off the lamp in my room and stood beside the window, carefully peeking out from the side to see if he would stay there even after my light went out. He did. I stood there watching for about 3 minutes, and he never moved once. Eventually, I closed the blinds and tried to forget about it. I told myself that from now on, I would simply keep the blinds shut once it got dark outside. While lying in bed that night, I thought about what I should do about the situation. I wondered if I should try to address it somehow. Maybe I could walk down to the dock and wave at him or attempt to start a conversation from across the canal. Another idea was to go over to his house and introduce myself. But honestly, that sounded stressful. Later that same night, as I was just beginning to fall asleep, I suddenly heard a noise coming from the backyard. It sounded like someone walking around on the deck. My heart immediately started pounding. I went to the bedroom window and tried to look down into the yard, but from the upstairs angle, I could not see anything. If I wanted a clear view, I would have to go downstairs. Before I could even decide what to do, a loud crashing sound exploded from below me. It was unmistakable, the sound of glass shattering. I ran downstairs as fast as I could, grabbed a kitchen knife, and picked up my phone so I could call 911. When I looked toward the back of the house, I immediately saw what had happened. The backyard window had been smashed. Broken glass covered the floor, and a single brick was lying on the wooden boards inside the kitchen. Someone had clearly thrown it through the window. For a moment, I was terrified that I might see someone hiding somewhere inside the house. Thankfully, there was no one there. I called 911 and told them I needed officers at my house immediately. Before the police arrived, I cautiously leaned toward the broken window and looked outside into the yard. I turned on the light above the back deck. Whoever had done it was already gone. At least they had not tried to come inside. When the officers arrived, I showed them the broken window and the brick on the floor. I also told them about the man I had been seeing across the canal, watching me since I moved in. I told them I was certain it had to be him. They asked if I had any reason to believe he had a problem with me. I told them absolutely not, because I had never even spoken to him before. I asked them if they could go over there and arrest him. They said they would drive over and knock on the door. Another patrol car arrived at my house while the first two officers went to check the place across the canal. About 20 minutes later, they came back. What they told me made the whole situation even stranger. According to them, nobody lived in that house. Apparently, a nearby neighbor had spoken to the officers and explained that the home had been foreclosed on months earlier, and the previous tenant had already been evicted. I do not know much about how foreclosures work, so I asked if maybe someone from the bank was staying there or checking on the property. The officers said they really had no idea. Their main advice was to install security cameras around my house in case anything else happened. They also left one of their patrol cars parked outside for the night, probably to make me feel a little safer since my window was now broken. The following morning I woke up early and decided to walk over to that house. I tried the front door first, but it was locked. Then I walked around to the back door. It was unlocked. I slowly opened it and stepped 2 steps inside the dark and empty house. The inside felt cold and eerie. Then I heard a noise from upstairs. That was enough for me. I turned around immediately and hurried back to my own house. The police car was still sitting out front. Later that day, I had the broken window repaired, and not long after that, I installed doorbell cameras at both the front and back of my house. Since then, I have never seen that man in the house again. To this day, I still have no idea who he was, whether he was living there secretly, whether he threw the brick through my window, or what his reason might have been. Thankfully, since that night, everything has been completely quiet, and I am hoping it stays that way. Moving out of my parents' house after living there for 28 years and buying my first place was a huge adjustment. I officially moved in during July of 2022, so the change was still very new to me at the time. My new house is only about a 30-minute drive from my parents' home, so it is not like I moved across the country or anything. Still, living alone for the first time felt strange. One thing I expected to enjoy was finally having peace and quiet at night. At my parents' house, my dad would constantly wake me up. He is a chronic insomniac and spends half the night walking up and down the stairs to get water or go to the bathroom. Unfortunately, I seem to have inherited his bad sleeping habits. I am an extremely light sleeper, so even small noises tend to wake me up. The layout of my house is pretty simple. There is a small unfinished basement that holds the laundry area and the boiler room. The first floor has the living room, kitchen, dining room, and a bathroom. Upstairs there are 3 bedrooms and another bathroom. I turned one of the bedrooms into a home office and another into a small workout room. During the first few days after I moved in, my dad came over to help me carry in furniture and get everything set up. We managed to finish most of the heavy work pretty quickly. After that, it was just small decorating projects and organizing things around the house. About a week after moving in, the house was finally starting to feel like home. One Sunday night, I could already tell I was going to struggle falling asleep. I was wide awake, and my mind would not shut off. I decided to take some melatonin along with a sleeping pill to help me drift off. Within an hour, I was completely out. Normally, when I take those, I sleep through the entire night without waking up. But that night was different. Something woke me up. I heard a noise coming from outside my bedroom. I had just woken up from a vivid dream, and my brain was still foggy. The sound was familiar, though. It was the sound of footsteps moving up the stairs. For a moment, I assumed it was my dad again, just like back at my parents' house. I was used to hearing him walking around in the middle of the night. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but then my mind slowly caught up with reality. My dad was not here. I sat up in bed and listened carefully. The footsteps had stopped. For a second, I wondered if my half-asleep brain had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just some kind of auditory hallucination caused by being half awake. Feeling nervous, I actually called out into the hallway. I was not sure what I expected to hear back. No one answered. I stepped out of my bedroom and turned on the hallway light. As I moved forward, I switched on the lights in each room one passed. When I reached the top of the stairs, I looked down. At the bottom of the staircase stood a tall man wearing a mask. He was staring straight up at me. For a moment, it did not even feel real. My brain struggled to process that there was actually a stranger inside my house. I did not see a weapon on him, but I was not about to take any chances. My voice shook as I yelled at him to get the hell out of my house. To my shock, he actually turned around and walked out through the front door. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could and locked the door behind him. As I grabbed my phone to call my dad, I suddenly heard the back door slam shut. There had been a second person inside the house the entire time, and I never even saw them. At that point, I was completely panicking. My dad answered right away, which was not surprising since he is usually awake anyway. When I explained what happened, he immediately asked why I was calling him instead of the police. He told me to hang up and call them right away. So I did. The operator asked me a long list of questions while officers were on their way to my house. When the police arrived, they interviewed me about everything that had happened. They wanted a description of the intruder, what might have been stolen, which direction they ran, and whether I saw any vehicle nearby. Unfortunately, I had no useful answers for most of those questions. I had not thought to watch where they went after leaving the house. The only description I could give was that one of them was tall and wearing a mask. After looking around the house, it did not seem like they had stolen anything. I did not keep anything particularly valuable out in the open on the first floor anyway. The officers eventually discovered how they had gotten inside. One of the kitchen windows had been forced open. It was just large enough for someone to climb through. Home invasions are the kind of thing you hear about on the news all the time, but you never really expect it to happen to you. It felt even more unreal that it happened only a week after I moved into my first house. I still wish I had been able to give the police more information that might have helped identify the people responsible. Ever since that night, I keep a knife next to my bed when I sleep.